Hi, in this chapter we are going to study about consumer demand analysis. The major objective that we are going to cover in this module is to know about the concept of demand analysis. We will try to discuss the concept of utility that plays a very important role when we are discussing about consumer. We will discuss about diminishing marginal utility, indifference curve, and we'll also try to understand about cardinal and ordinal utility approach. In the previous chapter, we all have studied about demand and supply. We have also seen the importance of demand and supply at the same time. Every time whenever we have studied these two market forces, we have seen that these two important forces plays a major part of it when we are talking about economy. A consumer in economy plays a very important role. A consumer is willing to buy a particular good to satisfy various needs and wants. Thus, it can be said that demand for goods are closely related to a level of satisfaction which a consumer derives from the goods and services what they consume. For instance, if the level of consumer satisfaction after consumption of goods and services is quite high, then you can say the demand of goods would rise and vice versa. Hence, you can say these plays a very important role whenever it comes to consumer satisfaction. The level of satisfaction derived by a consumer after consuming a goods or services is called as utility. Now, about this utility, we are going to discuss in the coming slides in details. But as of now, we'll just have an overview of what all things would be covered in this particular module. The level of satisfaction derived by a consumer after consuming any goods or service is called as utility. In other words, utility can be defined as a measure of consumer satisfaction received after consumption of any goods or services. The utility of goods would differ from person to person, individual to individual, depending on the taste, fashion, preferences, income, standard of living, etc. It is important for producer to measure the extent of utility or satisfaction received by a consumer after consuming any goods or services, because that would impact the demand of any goods or services. Hence, it is very important for all of us to first equip ourselves with the basic understanding about utility and other terms which will help us to drive in this module. Utility analysis is basically a systematic process of measuring utility derived a consumer after consumption of goods. It involves analyzing factors that influences consumer behavior for a particular goods. There are two approaches to measure utility, namely cardinal utility approach and ordinal utility approach. So, in this particular chapter, we would cover in details about these two approaches and we will try to see what are its significance. Let's first introduce the concept of consumer demand. We all know consumers are the king of the market. Consumer considers various factors before making any purchases. For example, a particular brand, a price, size, feature, etc. These are the factors which any consumer would keep in mind before making any purchases. These factors differ from one individual to another individual depending on different bases such as age, custom, socio-economic condition, taste, preferences and so on. Now, these factors forms the basis of consumer demand behavior. So, why do you think consumer demand or consumer analysis is important? Manufacturers are always interested to gain insight into consumer buying behavior. For this, they need to analyze well the consumer demand and their products and services. Hence, you can say a consumer demand analysis is a process of assessing the consumer behavior based on the satisfaction of different products after consuming what they receive. The satisfaction that consumer gain out of consumption, that is what is very important for any manufacturer. Now, there are different assumptions here. The first one is decisiveness. Decisiveness assumes that consumers have all the information they need to make an informed decision both about the product and their own desires. For example, an individual goes to a fast food restaurant and is asked to opt between pizza and a burger. Now, according to the assumption of decisiveness, an individual would act in one of the following ways. Either he would opt for a pizza, or he would opt for a burger, or none of the two and would walk out. In these scenarios, you would see the consumer are very well aware of the fact that what they are doing it, what they are opting it, which product they are opting for and why. They know it very well, they are very logical when they make their preferences. Similar example could be, suppose I go to a bookstore. I am very clear as to what kind of a book I am going to buy, whether I want to go for a fiction, autobiography, comic or any other magazines. So, being a consumer, I should know or I should be well informed about the products which is there in the market and which I am going to buy or which I will make purchase out of it. The second one is transitivity. It is like an analogy here wherein the consumer, especially in consumer demand, it is assumed that the preferences of individual consumer are always consistent in nature. An individual's preference for one commodity over another can be applied to other related commodity, and this is what is referred to as transitivity. In the above example, if suppose individual chooses a pizza over burger or burger over pasta, then the individual would prefer pizza over pasta too as per the assumptions of transitivity. The third assumption is non-satiation. Any guesses what does it mean? Well, it is assumed that consumer is never completely satisfied. If a consumer prefers a commodity, he or she would continue the demand, and this is what referred to as non-satiation. For example, a larger pizza is always preferred over a smaller one. Two dresses are preferred over one, etc. So, it is consumer by tendency, the nature of the consumer is always that they always want more and more of that unit. However, non-satiation is not a fundamental assumption, as rational consumer gets satisfied after a certain limit. Now, we will try to discuss and take a view as to what a utility is and what is its significance lies in economics. Utility, by this time, you must be knowing what exactly it is. So, in a normal scenario, a utility is also the total satisfaction or the benefit which a consumer derives when he or she is consuming any goods or services. Economic theories based on rational choice usually assumes that consumer will strive for maximizing their utility. The simple meaning is usefulness. The utility has been derived from the word usefulness. Now, in economics, utility is the capacity of a commodity to satisfy human wants. Utility is the quality in the goods and services in order to satisfy human wants. Now, you would have seen in the first unit when we were discussing about human wants, we all knew that human wants are unlimited in nature and we are never ever satisfied with whatever we have. And on the same time, our resources are limited in nature. Hence, it is very important for all of us to make out that what would best suit us in the limited resources, what would satisfy us. Thus, it is said that want satisfying capacity of goods and services is called as utility. In this way, utility is measured in terms of money or it is relative in nature. There is difference between utility and usefulness. A useful commodity may not be a utility of goods, depends upon the intensity of the want basically. So, a consumer buys or demands a particular commodity, he derives some benefit from its use. He feels that his given want is satisfied by the use or consumption of the commodity purchased. Utility thus is the basis of consumer demand. A consumer thinks about his demand for a commodity on the basis of utility derived from the commodity. Utility depends upon the intensity of want. When a want is unsatiated or unsatisfied or more intense, there is a greater urge of the demand or to demand of a particular commodity which satisfy a given want. In modern times, utility has been called as expected satisfaction. Expected satisfaction may be less, equal, more than the real satisfaction. One example of economic utility is the value consumer receives from the latest iPhone model. Apple responds to the needs and want of the consumer by updating and upgrading its phone on a regular basis. The economic utility of a good or services is important to understand because it directly influences the demand, price of that goods or services. Utility can be seen as two ways, from the product point of view and from the consumer point of view. When we are talking about a product point of view, utility refers to the power of a commodity to satisfy consumer wants. For example, a pen possesses its own utility whether it is consumed or not. A glass of water, a glass of juice has its own utility. While if you see from the consumer point of view, it is a psychological feeling of satisfaction or pleasure which varies from individual to individual, derived by a consumer on consumption of goods or services. Thus, there are following types of utility, that is form utility, time utility and so on. What do you mean by a form utility? This utility is created by changing the form or shape of the material. For example, a cabinet turned out from steel furniture made of wood and so on. Basically, from utility is created by manufacturing of goods. When we are talking about place utility, this utility is created by transporting the goods from one place to another. Thus, in marketing goods from the factory to marketplace, place utility is created. Similarly, when the food grains are shifted from farms to city market by grain merchant, place utility is created. Transport services are basically involved in creation of place utility. In retail trades, distribution services too, place utility is created. Thus, place utility of a commodity is always more in an area of scarcity than in an area of scarcity where the area of abundance is present. For example, Kashmir apples are most popular and fetch higher price in Pune than in Srinagar on account of such place utility. Let's come to the next one, that is time utility. Storing, hoarding and preserving certain goods over a period of time may lead to creation of time utility for such goods. Example, by hoarding or storing any food grains at the time of a bumper harvest and releasing their stocks for sale at the time of scarcity, traders derive the advantage of time utility and thereby fetch a higher price for the food grains. Utility of a commodity is always more at the time of scarcity. Trading essentially involves the creation of time utility. The next type of utility is service utility. This utility is created in rendering personal services to the consumer by various professionals such as lawyers, doctors, teachers, bankers, actors, etc. So with this we have seen what is the concept of utility and how a consumer demand analysis is important for us. In the coming slides, we are going to discuss about the forms, the types of utility, wherein we are going to discuss about total utility, marginal utility and so on. Thank you.